Why is sex wrong? And if it's wrong, why is it okay for marriage? Better yet, what does a Christ-like relationship look like with the opposite gender? Hey, you're watching the 514 podcast. I'm Chris, and this is Sean. Stay tuned for this.
Loved you once, shame on me. Loved you twice.
Welcome back to the 514 podcast. This is Sean. I'm Chris, and today we have with us again Mr. Brock Caldwell, who's our student associate pastor here at First Baptist Rogers. And I thought Brock was a great person to bring in, especially because he's young and he's been married. How long have you been married?
Almost 5 years.
Almost 5 years. Maybe he's not as young as I thought he was. Let's get somebody else real quick. I'm just kidding.
Sean's young enough. For all of us. He brings the median age down a bit.
There you go. I like it. Hey, so today we're actually going to be addressing some issues that a lot of times become very scary for parents to talk about, especially as a dad with two daughters. It's something, we don't necessarily like to talk about. But this is a great question, and I want us to take just a few minutes. We're going to try to knock down the sides of this podcast a little bit, so if you notice they're going to be a little shorter, we're trying to make it easier for you to watch. And if you have questions you would like us to address, please make sure when you're at our vertical service or Apex service to submit those questions. We'll have a box out there for you guys to submit them in. But today we're going to be looking at why is sex wrong, and if it's wrong, then why is it okay for marriage? And I think this is a valid question. And I'm married, Brock's married, Sean is not yet. Someday.
Right?
Someday, right? But we look all around us, and I don't know about you guys, it seems like sex is everywhere. I mean, it's it's in the media, it's how things are portrayed, and
it's in movies now too.
Oh, all over movies. And why? A lot of times we look at it and go, well, because of that, then it's wrong. Like nobody should be doing this. But okay, maybe it's not wrong for marriage. So I wanted to kind of take just a minute and just kind of break this down for just a second. And really part of the reason I did bring Brock into this, he's only been married for about 5 years, so he can remember his before marriage life. I have been married for over 17 years, and so I don't remember a whole lot of before married life. It's definitely becoming more of a distant memory than I thought it would be at this point in life. But it's just what it is. So first of all, let's just think for a minute. Is sex wrong? What do you think? Either one. Yeah. I mean, just tell me. What do you guys think?
I would say yes and no.
Okay.
But I would say...
So 50-50. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't.
Well, no.
See you next time on the 514 podcast.
And that was the last podcast before Chris and Brock got fired.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, that's not really what I'm saying, but it is wrong when you portray it as something that you enjoy to do. Something as that you want to do, but then again, you're too young to do.
It's interesting to hear your take on that as a student. I gotta be honest, like when I think about this question, I think really the answer to this question is no. It's not wrong. Sex was designed to be something wonderful. The problem is we make it wrong when we take it out of God's design. Mm-hmm. When you decide to go outside of the realm of the rules and the guidelines God gave us for sex, that's when it becomes wrong.
Yeah, I think a lot of things in the Bible, we see if God designed it, God defined it.
Yeah.
So if God is the one who made it, He is the one who gives us the parameters or the boundaries in which that thing can be enjoyed in. And so it's not that this thing is bad, it's that it's bad in the wrong circumstances. It's bad in the wrong relationship, and that relationship being any relationship outside of that between a married man and a married woman with one another. And so I think the illustration I've heard before is it's like fire. It can be a good thing in the right place, smoking barbecue, making s'mores, but you look at all these wildfires going on in Australia, California, Colorado, in the wrong place, it's a very bad thing. Mm-hmm. So it's all about the context in which it's being used.
I almost thought he was going to say smoking something. Did you catch that too? I don't know if that was...
What?
I'm just kidding. But I like your answer though, Sean, because I think it's interesting to hear, you're a very grounded student. You're one of our student leaders. You're very involved in our student ministry. To hear that answer, I think a lot of people your age in the church would have the same answer. And I think that's kind of a scary part to leave us in. So you want to add something to that?
Well, someone once told me that everything that happens in the Bible is good. But if in the Bible, I don't know who it was exactly, but this guy was married but also had sex with another woman when he was married and had a child.
And I'm guessing you're talking about David and Bathsheba there.
I think that's what it was. I
Yeah.
don't remember who that was.
So there's
Yeah.
a lot of things that happen that are described or recorded in the Bible. That doesn't mean that God is saying, hey, this is a good thing.
Yeah.
Because if you look at David's life, he had some very serious consequences for that.
Oh, yeah.
But I think thinking biblically about this, if God designed it, God defined it, it's helpful to think, when in Scripture do we first see this?
Yeah.
And why in Scripture do we first see this? And we see it first come up in Genesis chapter 2, right? God is there telling us about the relationship between Adam and his wife, and we see that sex, this intimate thing between Adam and Eve, is something that's introduced not after the fall, but actually before the fall, when God said that everything was good.
Right. It's actually chapter 2, verses 24 and 25, where Brock is talking about. It says, "For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed." Now, some of you may be watching this going, why in the world did he just say that part? But, yeah, I'm sorry, you were about to say something too.
But it says that the man shall leave his father and mother. Does that mean we can't go back home?
No, not at all. Not at all. But I would encourage you not to live at home after you got married. And your mom's probably right now clapping, saying, yes, that is exactly
Or
what needs to happen.
I mean, some people have to for a while, but moving in with your in-laws isn't ideal.
Hey, I love my in-laws. I love not living with them too. So it works out
Oh man,
really.
the camping trailer in the backyard's the wrong idea, I guess.
Well, you know, I mean, you're in your own house at that point. So just take that up with Eric and Tanisha. I'd like to see how that conversation goes.
They're all right with it.
Good stuff. But I think it's interesting. It says that they were both naked and were not ashamed. So think about this for a minute. When you talk about sex, you talk about it being wrong. And, you know, and sex is designed for pleasure. It's also designed to multiply humanity. And so God designed it that way. And I don't think we should feel guilty for God designing it that way. But I do think there's guilt that comes upon us when we don't treat it the way God designed it. And I think that's why he says they were both naked and were not ashamed. They were not. It was not a shameful thing for them to be in that situation. And, you know, so many times when I talk to students who have given in and have made the wrong decisions when it comes to that significant other, a lot of times there's a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, a lot of pain that's associated with that. And that's even the ones who didn't get pregnant.
But then again, I do hear a lot of kids that went to school and they've had it. They basically boast about it. They're like, "I did this."
Right. But just because they're boasting about it
But
doesn't
that
mean
doesn't
that they're
mean it's
ashamed
okay.
of it. That's exactly right. And a lot of times, because I can remember being in high school and people boasting about it and excited about it. I can remember sitting at the lunch table and even hearing even girls talk about it a little bit. And, of course, that was 20-something years ago. It wasn't as common then as it is now as far as people talking about it. But what I found is you start digging in, they're not as proud of that as they make it out to be, especially for Christians. Because I think as Christians, we have a conscience. We have some shame because we're not doing things the way God designed it. And a lot of times when you go, and I'm speaking to students, and they're dealing with depression and things like that, it's amazing how many times it goes back to them giving up their virginity. And I told somebody a while back, I was like, you know, in student ministry, I've gotten to where usually I can tell, especially with a girl, not as much with a guy, it's not as easy with guys, but with girls, I can almost tell you when they've made that wrong decision, because a lot changes about them. And a lot of that has to do with shame and them trying to overcome shame. I think that's where some of that bragging comes in. Their idea is, I can overcome this by trying to look good to everybody else, but in reality, inside, it hurts. On top of that, for people who have given in, when they do enter a marriage someday, they have some baggage that goes with it too. Mm-hmm. And that's hard. That's hard because God did not design marriage for us to be going in with that kind of baggage. So there is value in waiting. There's value in holding off, and it's not easy. I mean, I'll tell you, my wife and I, we dated for 3.5, almost 4 years before we got married, and those temptations were there, and they're going to be there for you guys who are watching this. And Brock would probably agree with me on that. He's been in that spot as well. But there's even forgiveness for those who do give in. Doesn't mean the consequences go away, but there is forgiveness.
I think also we need to be careful because, just like this is something it's good for the right relationship, it's wrong for the wrong relationship, but Jesus also expanded the teaching on sex to be more than just the physical act. But there's a mental side to this too. You know, Jesus equates the act of adultery with also the contemplation on lust and fixing our mind on those things that we shouldn't. You know, right now it's just as sinful, different consequences, but just as sinful to, you know, have sex outside of marriage as it is to watch pornography or to
Right.
lust about someone else. You know, we see, you mentioned earlier, I think you mentioned just how much our culture, our movies are playing into this, but there's TV shows that we can watch that take our mind to bad places, that show things that it's maybe not pornography, but it's not far off. And so we need to make sure we're not just saying, okay, well, I didn't do this act, so I'm fine. No, there's a whole nother side to this spiritual battle, apart from just what you may or may not do with another person.
That's right.
With me as a Christian and a high school student, I try not to find myself alone with a female.
Yeah.
I always try to have someone with me if there's going to be a female there.
And I think that's wise.
I wouldn't, even if you're out with your girlfriend, to be honest, bring someone with you.
Yeah.
Or
if
be in
you're at,
public places.
yeah, or if you're at your girlfriend's house or your boyfriend's house, don't go in the room with that one person. Be
Yeah.
around the parents at all times is what I would say.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. You know, don't set yourself up for temptation. In fact, if you're going to go on a date and you need somebody else, Sean will go. Just buy him the dinner. He's good to go.
True that. If I get
But,
into that.
I mean, even though that may be true, I know some of you guys are like, I'm not taking Sean. And it's nothing personal. But what he did say, I think is very interesting, is don't go in a bedroom with the
Yeah.
opposite sex.
Yeah.
Just don't. I mean, you're setting yourself up.
Mhm.
You know, and that becomes a temptation. Don't allow yourself to be in a spot where that temptation can come to reality, because when that happens, you're going to have a really hard time saying no. And to my case in point, go back and just look at, for instance, you know, Joseph. Whenever Potiphar's wife came in to seduce him, he didn't just resist. He didn't just say no. He took off running. Like he was out of there. And you look at sin, and especially you go back to Ephesians 6, it says, you know, resist the devil, to stand firm. But when it comes to sexual sin, it says to flee.
Yeah.
There's a whole lot to be said about that. It's not just a mental sin, it's a physical sin. As far as, you know, a physical temptation, let me put it that way. A physical temptation as much as it is mental. And so don't allow yourself to even be in that spot, because
Yeah.
you're going to give in. If you're not careful, you will
Put
give
the
in.
boundaries up beforehand, because you're not going to be thinking rationally
Right.
when it comes. So you got to keep yourself from getting to that point. Set the standard ahead of time rather than waiting for the moment. You know, you think of, I think of Daniel. It said that from the beginning of being taken into captivity, him and his friends resolved that they weren't going to defile themselves.
Yeah.
Living for Christ is something that you've got to decide beforehand as much as live out in that moment. And sometimes, like you said, removing yourself from the situation, or even not allowing yourself to be put in that situation in the first place is the key.
See, I
Yeah.
also have a lot of friends that say when they're engaged, it's okay,
Yeah.
but they're not married yet.
That's
it's
right.
not okay.
Engaged
not.
isn't married.
And to add to that point, because I love statistics, like I like looking at numbers and stuff. And this statistic, it may have changed some. I know the last time I looked, I think it was like 80-something% of relationships that have sexual intimacy before marriage or outside of marriage fail. So, young ladies, young men, as you're thinking about that person that you're dating, that you really like, you're really hoping this relationship will work out, I want to encourage you to think through that. Are you wanting to say, okay, well, I'm going to take this relationship from the possibility of surviving to an 80% failure rate, and are you willing to do that by having sex, or are you willing to wait? And hear me out on this too. I'm not saying if you wait, every relationship is going to be perfect. There are people I know who waited till marriage, who did everything right, but got into marriage and just married the wrong person. So that still happens. This is not a fix-all for relationships, but you are hurting that relationship when you have sex outside of God's design for marriage.
A friend of mine recently just got out of a relationship because the girl in the relationship wanted to have sex. He was
Yeah.
like, I don't want this, so no.
Man, that's
And I
smart.
left.
That's smart. Yeah, that's that fleeing. Like, don't stick with somebody who has a different moral value than what you do, because you're going to give in to them at some point, especially if you're the dude of that relationship. That's hard. I don't know why it is, but I think it's harder for guys than it is for girls. And I've never been a girl, so y'all girls, you may say, no, you're wrong. I get it. But I'm just looking biblically. We have, you guys have more sensories involved in our eyes and how we view things and how we look at things and what that does to our bodies than females for some reason. And that's just a proven psychological fact.